Who invited you here? That was the question no one was supposed to ask out loud. Not on live television. Not in front of an audience. Not with cameras rolling in a studio full of people who suddenly forgot how to breathe. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But that's exactly where this story begins. Not with a headline. Not with a scandal already spiraling online. But with a room full of celebrities who thought they knew what kind of night they were about to have. Until someone unexpected walked in. And the strangest part? No one knew she was coming. Before we dive into what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a space where every face turns toward you? Not because they're excited, but because they're confused? That split second where the energy shifts and you can feel the question in the air, even if no one says it? That's the moment Meghan Markle stepped into at late night with Seth Meyers. Not dramatic enough yet. Just wait. Because nothing that followed was planned. Nothing was scripted. And the most uncomfortable part of the entire night wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. The episode was supposed to be simple. Daniel Radcliffe promoting his new Broadway project. Lindsay Mendez talking about her performance and recent award buzz. Jonathan joining for a light, fun segment. The kind audiences love because nothing serious happens. It was supposed to be an easy night. But then the unexpected happened, and suddenly the atmosphere didn't feel like late-night comedy anymore. It felt like a social experiment no one had signed up for. Let's back up for a second. Just hours before the show, the studio had that usual pre-taping buzz. Staff members running around with clipboards. Producers rehearsing cues. A couple of nervous interns trying not to spill coffee. The kind of organized chaos that works only because everyone knows exactly what's supposed to happen. But here's the twist. There was no note. No email. No scheduled segment. No heads up. Still, someone saw her name appear on a guest list that wasn't supposed to change. Imagine being that person. You glance down, see a name that shouldn't be there, and suddenly your pulse jumps like you just pressed the wrong button on a missile control panel. Do you speak up? Do you double-check? Do you pretend you didn't see it? Because what if it's true? What if saying something makes it worse? Here's where it gets interesting, and where the confusion turns into tension. One producer allegedly asked another, quietly, almost whispering, why would Meghan Markle show up to this taping? Not hostile, not dramatic, just uncomfortable. The type of question that doesn't have a safe answer. And that's how curiosity turned into panic. See, late-night shows run on precision. Nothing is left to chance. Even casual jokes are rehearsed. Even spontaneity is structured. So having someone appear who wasn't booked isn't just unusual. It's unheard of. Now imagine being Seth Meyers in that moment. You're minutes away from walking on stage. Your cue cards are finalized. Your timing is locked. The energy is light, playful, the way late night is meant to be. Then someone tells you a high-profile, heavily discussed figure has arrived without warning. What do? Do you ignore it? Do you acknowledge it? Do you ask why? Or pretend everything is normal? This is where the tone of the night begins to shift. Because before Meghan even appeared in the same room as the other guests, her presence was already changing the atmosphere. And that's the part nobody saw on camera. Let's talk about the audience for a second. People think studio audiences are relaxed and casual. But they're not. They're instructed when to laugh. Told when to react. Sometimes even told when to gasp. But what happens when something unexpected occurs? Something even the host didn't plan. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Real silence. The kind that makes everyone suddenly fascinated with their shoes. That's the silence that would come later. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're still in the moment just before everything shifts. The moment before Daniel Radcliffe walks into a room and freezes. Before Lindsay Mendez decides she's not going to pretend she doesn't notice what's happening. Before Jonathan makes the comment no one expected from him. Right now, we're in the setup. Because every story has a trigger, a moment where everything quietly changes before anyone realizes it. And for this story, it begins with one unanswered question. Who invited her? Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone miscommunicated. Maybe someone assumed. Or maybe. And this is where the curiosity gap widens. Someone didn't want to admit the truth. Let me ask you directly. If you walked into a space where no one expected you, would you stay? Would you try to blend in? Or would you take control of the room before the room took control of you? Because that's the core of what makes this night so fascinating. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic in the way headlines love. It was subtle, and sometimes subtle is far more uncomfortable. Now here's where things slowly start tightening. Daniel Radcliffe had been joking with a producer just seconds before walking into the backstage hallway. He was relaxed, smiling, completely unaware. Then he turned the corner, and everything stopped. But we're not opening that door yet, because there's something you need to understand first. Studio spaces feel smaller in real life than they look on television. You can't avoid eye contact. You can't pretend not to see someone standing 5 feet away. You can't hide behind an invisible wall of polite ignorance. And when someone unexpected appears in that tight space, the discomfort spreads faster than sound. People feel it before they understand it. That's why the energy changed instantly, even before anyone spoke. Because presence can sometimes say more than words. Now, hold on to that thought for a moment, because it becomes important later. Right now, we're at the edge of the moment where tension transforms into action. And it's about to happen much sooner than anyone expected. Because just when the room tries to return to normal, someone reacts in a way no one predicted. And that's where everything begins. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It started with something small. Not a comment. Not a confrontation. Just a glance. Because sometimes the beginning of a breakdown isn't a moment. It's a reaction. One staff member noticed the way Daniel paused. Another noticed how quickly someone pretended to check their phone. Someone else stepped aside, almost too quickly, like they didn't want to accidentally become part of whatever was happening. But here's the thing nobody ever admits. People don't need context to sense tension. They just need silence. And suddenly, the backstage hallway felt packed, even though no one moved. Let's zoom out. Before Meghan showed up, the night had a predictable rhythm. Rehearsals, green room snacks, light chatter. Celebrities who have done this 100 times know how it works. They sit, they smile, they wait. But unpredictability is the enemy of comfort. And unpredictability just walked through the door. Now, here's where most people get the story wrong. They assume the awkwardness started on stage during the taping. But the truth is, the moment that changed everything happened before a single camera rolled. Because being caught off guard in private is one thing. Being caught off guard in public, with millions waiting to watch, is something else entirely. Let me paint this picture more clearly. There are 2 types of celebrity entrances. The expected kind, where applause is already planned, and the kind where the room reacts before the brain catches up. This was the second kind. And what makes it more fascinating is that no one knew what to do with it. Not the interns, not the stage managers, not the guests. Even security wasn't sure whether to approach or stand back. Because how do you handle a situation where the person isn't doing anything wrong, but also isn't supposed to be there? That's the gray area where discomfort lives. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a place where you could feel the temperature drop, even though nothing was said? That's what makes this moment unforgettable. Not the drama, but the silence wrapped around it. Now, before the tension could settle, someone tried to act normal. Because that's what people do when they panic. A nervous laugh. A forced smile. A too cheerful "oh, hi." But here's the strange part. No one expected Meghan to react the way she did. She didn't shrink. She didn't panic. She didn't pretend she had taken a wrong turn. She stood still, calm, almost rehearsed. As if she expected the reaction and was prepared for it. That's when the dynamic shifted again. Because confidence in an uncomfortable room doesn't dissolve tension, it magnifies it. Now let's talk about Seth Meyers for a moment. Hosting a late-night show isn't just comedy. It's crisis management with a smile. When something unexpected happens, the host has one job. Keep the audience from knowing anything is wrong. But this wasn't happening on air. It was happening backstage, minutes before showtime. And Seth had a decision to make. Address it quietly? Ignore it completely? Or walk into a situation that could go in any direction? Producers tried to get ahead of it. But the problem with surprise is that it always arrives too late for preparation. One staff member whispered something that later became the theme of the night. Just act like everything is normal. But nothing was normal anymore. And when people try too hard to appear calm, they only look more terrified. Meanwhile, Lindsay Mendez was in the hallway, moments from being escorted onto set. She was focused, relaxed, ready, until she wasn't. Because someone leaned in and murmured something that stopped her mid-step. She blinked, processing, then asked a question that would echo throughout the night. Wait, why is she here? Not dramatic, not rude, just honest. And honesty has a way of breaking the surface when everyone else is pretending. But the moment that would shift everything hadn't happened yet. Because before any words were exchanged, a camera light turned on. Not for taping, not for broadcast, for rehearsal, which meant one thing. There was no more time to figure this out. Whatever happened next would happen live. Let's pause there for a moment, because it's easy to assume this was all about Meghan's presence. But that's only half the story. The real tension came from something else. No one knew what she wanted. People can handle surprise guests, as long as there's a purpose. But when purpose is missing, imagination fills the gap. And imagination is always worse than reality. Was she there to support someone? Was she filming something? Did someone invite her unofficially? Was she hoping for on-air acknowledgement? Or was this something else entirely? No one knew. And that uncertainty created the kind of discomfort that spreads like wildfire, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. Now, here's where the timing becomes critical. Because just as producers tried to regroup, Daniel Radcliffe walked straight into the center of it. He wasn't warned. He wasn't prepared. He wasn't expecting anyone in the hallway. So when he turned the corner and saw Meghan standing there, calm, silent, unannounced, his reaction wasn't dramatic. It was human. A pause. A flicker of confusion. A slight step back, like his brain needed a second to reboot. Not rude. Not emotional. Just surprised. But sometimes a surprised expression says more than a full conversation. Someone nearby noticed. Then someone else did. And in a matter of seconds, that reaction spread through the room like a silent alarm. Let me ask you, isn't it strange how a single expression can change the energy of an entire space? People don't follow what is said. They follow what is felt. And what people felt in that moment was simple. Something was off. Now here's the part most viewers will never know. While Daniel tried to recover gracefully, someone backstage made a call, not on a cell phone, but through the internal headset system. A quiet message. Short. Urgent. It didn't say her name. It only said, "We need the host." That was the moment everything shifted from confusion to concern. Because once the host is needed before a segment begins, the situation is no longer casual. It's official. And while all of this was happening, the studio audience was completely unaware, laughing at pre-show warm-up jokes, clapping on cue, waiting for the fun to start. They had no idea what was brewing backstage, but they were about to feel the ripple, because what began as silence was seconds away from becoming visible, and what came next would push the night into territory no one expected. Not the guests, not the host, and definitely not Meghan herself, who shows up to a nationally televised late-night taping without being on the guest list. That was the unspoken question hovering in the air long before anyone dared to actually voice it. It didn't begin with shouting. It didn't begin with confrontation. It began with something much quieter. A door opening. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a soft push, a hinge shifting, and the kind of entrance that should have gone unnoticed. Except it didn't. Because the moment Meghan stepped inside the backstage corridor, everything changed. The hallway wasn't large. People imagine backstage spaces as luxurious, sprawling, lined with velvet sofas and endless catering tables. But in reality, late-night studios are tight, practical, narrow. Every inch is designed for function, not comfort. Which means when someone enters who wasn't expected, there's nowhere for the moment to hide. Let's rewind a few minutes before that door opened. The cast and crew were moving through their usual pre-show routine. A stage manager performed the nightly ritual of checking timing marks on the floor. Someone from wardrobe rushed past holding a brush in one hand and a lint roller in the other. A comedian scheduled for a later segment rehearsed lines under their breath while pacing. Everything was on schedule. Everything made sense. No one could have predicted that the next 60 seconds would shift the tone of the entire night. Have you ever experienced that strange feeling where the world seems ordinary, and then suddenly, without warning, the air thickens? That's how subtle chaos works. It doesn't begin with noise. It begins with stillness. A production assistant was the first to notice her. Not because Meghan drew attention to herself, but because the assistant nearly collided with her while carrying bottled water to the green room. She froze mid-step. It wasn't shock. It wasn't excitement. It was confusion. like seeing a familiar face in the wrong city. Her mind scrambled through possibilities. Was there a surprise segment no one told her about? Was this some kind of cameo? Was she lost? Was she supposed to be escorted? The assistant did what people do when they don't have answers. She pretended she hadn't seen anything and kept walking. But the human brain has a way of betraying denial. Because even as she looked away, her eyes flicked back. Once. Twice. Just enough to confirm that this moment was real. Meghan didn't seem fazed by any of it. She stood calmly, hands folded loosely in front of her, as if she was exactly where she planned to be. And that's what made the situation so unsettling. Unexpected behavior makes people nervous. Unexpected confidence makes them terrified. Within 30 seconds, 3 more staff members had noticed. Not one of them approached. Not one of them asked whether she was waiting for someone. Instead, they moved around her the way people walk around a puddle they can't explain, slowly, cautiously, hoping it disappears on its own. The irony? No one had actually done anything yet. There were no raised voices. No awkward attempts at small talk. Just presence. Sometimes a moment becomes memorable not because of what happens, but because of what might happen. That corridor became a pressure chamber. The lighting suddenly felt too bright. The air felt too thin. And every passing second made the space feel smaller. Now, here's where the story takes its first quiet twist. 2 production interns were positioned farther down the hallway, sorting cue cards and trying to look useful. They weren't supposed to notice anything except their assigned tasks. But people sense disruption before they understand it. Their hands stopped moving. Their conversation trailed off. One whispered something to the other, not out of gossip, but out of uncertainty. Is that who I think it is? They weren't wrong. But acknowledging it made the moment real. And reality is the one thing no one was ready for. Let's shift perspective for a moment. Imagine being Meghan in that hallway. You walk into a space where no one expected you. No one welcomes you. No one approaches. Instead, the room becomes a silent chessboard. Every person freezes just long enough for you to notice. Most people would shrink. But shrinking wasn't what happened here. She stood taller. Not arrogantly. Not defiantly. Just with a stillness that suggested intention. And intention is what made everyone nervous. Because surprise is only scary when you can't predict the next move. Now, let's talk about timing. The crucial detail that turned confusion into tension. Just as the hush spread through the hallway, a nearby monitor flickered with a countdown. 10 minutes until the opening monologue. 10 minutes until the audience was live. 10 minutes until the host took the stage. There was no time for surprises. No time for explanations. No time for error. Late-night shows run like airport takeoffs. Once you reach the runway, there's no turning back. Now imagine being a producer at that exact moment. Your job depends on preventing chaos. Your reputation depends on predictability. And suddenly, unpredictability is standing 5 feet away. One producer tried to remain calm. He adjusted his headset. He inhaled through his nose. He started walking toward her with the hesitant steps of someone approaching a sleeping tiger. But before he reached her, another voice crackled through the headset speaker. Stand by. 2 simple words. But in television, those words don't mean wait. They mean don't move until you know the consequences. So he stopped, halfway, between responsibility and fear. And that's when the next layer of tension surfaced. At the opposite end of the hallway, Daniel Radcliffe was finishing a pre-show conversation with a crew member. Something casual, something light, something that belonged in a normal night. He was smiling. That would be the last moment of ease he experienced for a while. Because then he began walking toward the green room. His pace was unhurried. His posture relaxed. He was used to this environment. He had done talk shows since he was basically a child. But the moment he turned the corner, everything shifted. He didn't stop abruptly. He didn't stumble. He simply paused, the kind of pause that lasts less than a second, but says more than a full sentence. His expression didn't turn into shock. It turned into calculation. The human brain processes surprise in 3 steps. Recognition, assessment, response. Daniel's face moved through all 3. Recognition, that is who it looks like. Assessment, she should not be here. Response, stay neutral. Neutrality is a skill, especially for someone who has lived under global attention. But neutrality also sends a message, whether intentional or not. Because everyone else in the hallway reacted to his reaction. The intern stared. The stage manager froze mid-clipboard check. The producer who stopped halfway stopped breathing entirely. No words were spoken. But the question hanging in the air sharpened into something unmistakable. If Daniel didn't know why she was there, then who did? Let me ask you directly. Have you ever witnessed a moment where everyone assumes someone else has the answer and then realizes no one does? That's when discomfort turns into collective panic. Not dramatic panic. Not running around panic. Silent panic. The kind that sits behind the ribcage and pulses. Daniel recovered quickly. His expression softened. He gave a polite nod, not a greeting, but an acknowledgement. Then he stepped aside so he wasn't blocking the hallway. A small gesture, but in that environment, every gesture meant something. Two crew members exchanged looks. One raised their eyebrows. The other shook their head slightly, as if to say, "Do not get involved." Because involvement means responsibility. And responsibility means risk. Now here's where the energy in the room takes another turn. Meghan didn't force interaction. She didn't approach Daniel. She didn't speak. And that silence became its own statement. Sometimes not reacting creates the biggest reaction. Meanwhile, the audience upstairs was being warmed up with jokes and applause practice, completely unaware that the atmosphere beneath them was unraveling. 7 minutes to showtime. A staff member with a clipboard ducked into the hallway, focused only on checking green room assignments. She looked up, saw Meghan, stopped walking. Her expression went through 3 stages: recognition, surprise, restraint. Then she cleared her throat and said the safest possible sentence in the English language. "Can I help you with anything?" Not "who are you?" Not "why are you here?" Just the most neutral offer ever constructed. But Meghan didn't answer immediately. She just looked at the staff member, calm and steady, leaving enough silence to make the question feel suddenly dangerous. And before she responded, another voice entered the moment. Not from her, not from Daniel, but from down the hall. Lindsay Mendez. She had been heading toward the stage entrance, expecting to walk straight into the standby area before her segment. But what she saw stopped her mid-stride. Her reaction was not dramatic. It was genuine. A blink, a tightening of the jaw, a quiet exhale that sounded almost like a laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. She didn't say anything. But her expression said everything. Because Lindsay wasn't confused. She was skeptical. And skepticism changes the temperature of a room faster than fear. 5 minutes to showtime. A headset crackled again. "We need the host." Not loud, not frantic, just controlled urgency. And that was the moment when the night officially entered unfamiliar territory. Because when the host is summoned before cameras roll, something is happening that cannot be ignored. But what came next would make the quiet tension explode in a way no one was prepared for. And it all started with one unexpected voice stepping forward. Daniel Radcliffe's shocked reaction. It wasn't supposed to be Daniel. No one expected him to be the first celebrity to come face-to-face with the unexpected guest who had just rewritten the energy of the entire backstage hallway. But sometimes timing doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes it just happens. Daniel Radcliffe walked straight into a moment he never signed up for. And the strangest part? He didn't say a single word. Not at first. Let's rewind to the exact second before everything shifted. Daniel had been in the green room, relaxed in the way only someone who has survived decades of press tours can be. He'd been sipping water, laughing with a crew member about a light-hearted backstage joke, completely unaware that the atmosphere outside that door was no longer normal. Someone knocked twice, signaling the standard call time. It was routine, predictable. He stood, straightened his jacket, thanked the crew member, and walked out into the hallway, expecting nothing more than the usual pre-show calm. Instead, he stepped into a room frozen mid-breath. Have you ever walked into a space and instantly known you weren't supposed to say anything? That's what hit Daniel first. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Charged silence. A silence so thick it felt like sound would break if anyone spoke too loudly. He took 2 steps forward before realizing everyone else wasn't moving. That alone was unusual. Backstage areas don't stop. Ever. People walk. People talk. People rush with purpose. So stillness? Stillness means something is wrong. Daniel's instincts kicked in long before his expression changed. Actors learn to read rooms faster than most people. It's a survival skill in an industry where tone shifts without warning. And Daniel felt the shift immediately. His eyes moved, not dramatically, Not in a double take, just a small, subtle scan of the hallway. And then he saw her, Meghan, standing completely still, not speaking, not reacting, not pretending she had taken a wrong turn, just waiting. Daniel didn't freeze in fear. He froze in processing, because his brain had to make sense of three unusual facts at the same time. 1. She wasn't scheduled. 2. No one was talking to her. 3. No one was explaining why she was there. And that combination is what made the moment surreal. Now here's where the reaction becomes fascinating. Celebrities are used to being surprised, but they are not used to being surprised in confined spaces with no escape route and no context. Daniel had 4 possible responses. Say hello, ask a question, call someone over, or stay neutral. He chose the only safe option. Neutrality. A small nod. A polite half-smile. Nothing more. But neutrality can be louder than confrontation, because everyone else in the hallway watched Daniel's reaction as if it were a cue. If he didn't know why she was there, then no one did. The intern's posture changed instantly. One of them straightened so fast you'd think they heard a military command. Another suddenly found the floor fascinating. A stagehand adjusted a prop that didn't need adjusting. A producer tried to look busy by flipping through a clipboard with blank pages. People act strange when they don't know what behavior is expected. Have you ever noticed that? When uncertainty enters a room, humans scramble for normalcy. But the harder they try to look normal, the more suspicious everything becomes. Daniel was still processing the moment when something subtle but important happened. Meghan made eye contact with him. Not aggressively, not challengingly, just directly. And Daniel's expression shifted, not in fear, not in anger, but in discomfort. Because eye contact without context is one of the fastest ways to make the human brain panic. He glanced away, just for a second, but that second was enough. You know how sometimes a tiny moment can ripple outward like dropping a pebble in still water? That was the ripple, because that glance away was the first visible sign that the situation wasn't just surprising, it was unsettling. Now imagine being a producer watching this unfold. Your job is to prevent awkwardness, not witness it. So one producer finally stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a situation that could go very right. Or very, very wrong. He opened his mouth slightly, preparing to speak. But before a single word came out, Daniel did something unexpected. He took a step back. Not a large step, not a dramatic step, just enough to put space between himself and the moment. Why does that matter? Because stepping back is a subconscious response. It means, this situation is not safe for engagement. Not dangerous physically, dangerous socially. And in Hollywood, social danger is sometimes worse. Let me ask you something. What's more uncomfortable? A person yelling at you, or a person who says nothing while everyone watches? Silence scares people more than noise. And this silence was stretching too thin. Daniel finally decided to break it. Not with words, but with movement. He shifted to the side, positioning himself in a place where he could still reach the set entrance, but didn't have to stand directly across from Meghan. It was a diplomatic retreat, but everyone noticed. Actors are used to being observed. But this was different. Daniel wasn't performing. He was reacting. And reactions reveal truth. A nearby crew member tried to diffuse the tension with the worst possible strategy. Forced cheerfulness. They clapped their hands once and chirped, "All right." Almost showtime, everyone. No one responded. Because pretending normalcy only works when normalcy is still an option. At this point, the headset channel erupted quietly. Not yelling, just quick, clipped instructions. Check with segment producer. Hold talent in hallway. Do not escort to stage yet. Find Seth. And that last line, find Seth. That told Daniel everything he needed to know. This wasn't a harmless misunderstanding. This was an unscheduled variable. Now let's shift perspective again. Imagine being Meghan at that exact moment. A famous actor sees you. He doesn't engage. The room freezes. People whisper through headsets. No one approaches. Most people would feel panic rising like heat. But Meghan stayed still. Controlled. Almost too controlled. And that calmness created a second layer of tension. The more unaffected she appeared, the more affected everyone else became. Because humans fear what they can't read. Daniel was still near the corner of the hallway when a staff member finally attempted to create a bridge. They walked up to him and murmured something too quietly to be heard. But whatever they said made Daniel's eyebrows lift slightly. Not in shock, in realization. Because something had just been confirmed to him. Maybe that she wasn't scheduled. Maybe that no one knew why she was there. Maybe that the situation was being handled. But whatever the message was, it didn't solve anything. It just made the moment more fragile. For minutes to showtime. Upstairs, the audience applauded on cue. Unaware the host they were waiting for was now being pulled into a situation he didn't expect. Daniel exhaled slowly and glanced toward the stage entrance. The way someone looks for an exit without wanting to look like they're looking. But before he could step away from the moment entirely, something happened that no one predicted. Meghan shifted her weight. Just slightly. A movement so small it shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because it signaled something no one was prepared for. She wasn't leaving. And that changed the stakes. Daniel froze again, not in fear, but in calculation. Because now there were only two possibilities. Either someone invited her, or someone was going to have to tell her she wasn't supposed to be there. And neither option was simple. Actors are protected in controlled environments. But this was no longer controlled. A single misstep could become a headline. A single comment could turn into a viral clip. A single facial expression could explode on social media. Daniel knew that. Everyone knew that. And that's why no one spoke. But the silence was reaching its breaking point. Because tension doesn't disappear on its own. It needs a release. And that release came from a direction no one was expecting. Not from Daniel. Not from a producer. Not from Meghan. But from someone else who had just walked into the hallway. And what they said would change the entire energy of the night. There are moments in live television when the host becomes the last person in the building to know what's happening. This was one of those moments. Seth Meyers was upstairs, completely unaware that the atmosphere beneath him had shifted from routine professionalism to silent crisis management. He was reviewing cue cards, running through monologue beats, doing exactly what a seasoned host does before stepping into a room full of people ready to laugh. Then his earpiece crackled. It wasn't the usual check-in. Not the countdown. Not the standard status update. Just 3 words. We need you. Not optional. Not casual. Urgent. Seth froze mid-sentence, staring at the cue card in his hand without seeing a single word printed on it. Hosts know the difference between show-related urgency and real urgency. This was the second kind. He lowered the card slowly and responded the way a professional does when something unexpected appears. What's going on? Silence on the other end. Not because no one wanted to answer, but because no one knew how to answer. Finally, a voice came through. There's a situation backstage. Seth blinked. A situation. Not a problem. Not an issue. A situation. Television uses that word when something feels too unpredictable to define. He stood up, his mind shifting instantly from performance mode into assessment mode. But here's the twist. Seth had no idea what he was walking into. He didn't know Meghan was in the building. He didn't know Daniel had already encountered her. He didn't know the hallway had turned into a silent pressure cooker of confusion and restraint. All he knew was that the tone in the producer's voice was wrong. And in late-night TV, tone is everything. Let's shift for a moment. People think hosts just tell jokes and read teleprompters. But hosting is about control. Controlling energy. Controlling timing. Controlling unpredictability. A good host makes chaos look like comedy. A great host prevents chaos before the audience ever notices. Seth was about to discover that preventing chaos wasn't an option tonight. He walked out of the prep room, his pace faster than usual, but not rushed. Comedy teaches one crucial survival skill. Never let people see you panic. As he moved through the hallway toward the stairs, a stage manager intercepted him. They didn't smile. They didn't do the fake, cheerful tone television people rely on when something is wrong. They just said quietly, "You should come with me." No explanation. No details. Just motion. Seth nodded once. He didn't ask why. Not because he wasn't curious, but because he already understood the rule. If they didn't volunteer information immediately, it meant the information wasn't simple. He followed the stage manager down the narrow stairwell that connected the studio floor to the backstage corridor. With every step, the noise of the audience grew louder above them. Laughter, applause practice, anticipation. The contrast was surreal. Upstairs, excitement. Downstairs, silence. Halfway down the steps, Seth asked the question every host eventually has to ask in their career. Is someone upset? The stage manager hesitated. Not exactly. Not exactly. Two words that explain nothing and everything at the same time. They reached the bottom of the stairs. And that's when Seth felt it. Energy. You don't have to see tension to know it's there. You can feel it in the air before you enter the room. He turned the corner into the hallway and saw what everyone else had been staring at for the past several minutes. Meghan, standing calmly, hands together, not speaking. Daniel off to the side, pretending to be relaxed but clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Crew members scattered like furniture no one knew where to place. No movement, no conversation, just a collective attempt to avoid eye contact with reality. Seth slowed to a stop. Hosts are trained to process information fast, faster than most people realize. And in less than 1 second, Seth registered 6 critical facts. 1. Meghan was present. 2. She was not scheduled. 3. No one was escorting her. 4. Daniel looked uncomfortable. 5. Lindsay Mendez was watching from a distance. 6. No one was taking responsibility. He didn't show any reaction on his face. That was skill. Hosts don't get to look surprised. But inside, his mind was racing. He stepped closer, maintaining the neutral, controlled expression that late-night hosts master after years of unpredictable interviews. He didn't approach Meghan immediately. Instead, he turned to the nearest producer. Quiet voice. Measured tone. What happened? The producer swallowed. We're still figuring that out. Still figuring that out. Not reassuring. Not clarifying. Just confirmation that the situation was as unstructured as it looked. Seth nodded once, but inside, that single sentence told him the truth. No one knew how to handle this. He glanced at Meghan, not staring, not avoiding, just acknowledging. She didn't look away. She didn't look nervous. She looked like someone who expected to be addressed. That meant one thing. He had to speak to her. There was no version of this night where he could ignore her presence and hope it resolved itself. Not with cameras minutes from rolling. Not with talent watching. Not with crew frozen like statues. But before he could take a step toward her, someone beat him to it. And that person could not have been more unexpected. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't a producer. It wasn't security. It was Jonathan. He had just arrived, completely unaware of the tension, and walked straight into the center of it. Jonathan didn't pause the way Daniel had. He didn't freeze. He reacted out loud. The first words spoken in that hallway in nearly 5 minutes were his. And he said them without hesitation. Wait, why are you here? Not whispered. Not subtle. Audible. Honest. Spoken like someone who didn't realize the entire hallway had been trying not to say that exact sentence. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. This silence wasn't tense. It was explosive, because once the question was spoken, it couldn't be taken back. And now, Seth had a real problem. It wasn't just a situation anymore. It was a moment that would define the rest of the night. He had exactly 3 seconds to decide how to respond. 3 seconds to choose between escalation and control. 3 seconds to prevent a private awkwardness from turning into a public disaster. But the decision was taken away from him. Because before Seth could speak, before anyone could soften the impact, before the tension could be redirected, Meghan answered. And what she said was not what anyone expected. Lindsay Mendez refuses to play along. There are 2 types of people in uncomfortable situations. The ones who pretend nothing is wrong, and the ones who won't. Lindsay Mendez was the second kind. She wasn't confrontational. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't the type to stir chaos for attention. But she was honest. And when honesty enters a room full of people pretending not to notice something, the temperature changes fast. Let's return to the exact moment after Jonathan's question shattered the silence. Wait, why are you here? Those 4 words were still hanging in the air like smoke when Meghan finally responded. Her voice was calm. I'm just here to watch the show. Nothing aggressive. Nothing emotional. Just a simple sentence that should have defused everything. But it didn't. Because instead of resolving confusion, it created a new problem. Watching is what? A guest? A supporter? An audience member? Someone waiting to be acknowledged on camera? No one knew. And uncertainty is gasoline in a room already filled with tension. Daniel lowered his eyes. Jonathan looked like he immediately regretted speaking. Seth opened his mouth, but no words came out yet, because he was still deciding whether to guide, redirect, or control. But Lindsay? She reacted differently. Let's rewind 10 seconds before her response. Lindsay had been standing slightly behind Seth, close enough to observe, but far enough to avoid being pulled into the moment. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes revealed something else. Recognition, confusion, and then a flash of disbelief. Lindsay wasn't someone easily rattled. She had handled difficult directors, live theater malfunctions, critics, and the kind of pressure only Broadway performers understand. But this was something else. Because unlike everyone else, she didn't try to hide her reaction. She took a slow breath, stepped forward, not aggressively, just intentionally, and positioned herself beside Seth. Not behind him, beside him. That small shift spoke volumes. It meant she wasn't pretending this was normal, and she wasn't going to act like she didn't notice what everyone else was trying to avoid. Have you ever been in a situation where someone finally acknowledges the thing everyone has been ignoring, and suddenly the truth becomes unavoidable? That was this moment. The hallway felt different now. Not frozen, not silent, alert. Meghan's calm expression didn't change. She maintained steady composure, offering no apology, no explanation, just presence. And that presence demanded interpretation. Seth tried to regain control. He took one step forward and spoke in the practiced, neutral tone of someone who solves problems with charm. "Oh, well, welcome. We just weren't expecting additional visitors today." It was the safest sentence he could choose. Soft, polite, non-confrontational. But Lindsay didn't smile. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in aggression, but in honest confusion. She tilted her head, studying Meghan the way someone studies an unexpected line on a contract. Then she asked a question that wasn't rude, wasn't dramatic, just real. "Were you invited?" Not accusatory, not loud, just plain. And plain can be more cutting than sharp. Everyone in the hallway reacted the same way. Stillness. Because that was the one question no one else had dared to say out loud. Meghan hesitated. Not long, but long enough for the room to feel it. Then she answered, "I'm here as a guest." Again, technically neutral, but vague. Too vague. Guest of who? Guest how? Guest why now? Lindsay noticed the ambiguity. Her expression didn't soften. It tightened, just slightly, the kind of tightening that happens when someone realizes the situation isn't adding up. Actors know when someone is performing, and Lindsay was watching a performance without a script. Let's pause here. There's something important about Lindsay's personality that matters in this moment. She is not someone who thrives on spectacle. She is grounded, direct, respected for authenticity. So when she speaks, it carries weight, not because of volume, but because of sincerity. She looked at Seth, not for guidance, but for clarity. Is this something we should know about? The question wasn't about Meghan. It was about transparency. If there was a change, why wasn't the cast told? Why wasn't the lineup adjusted? Why was someone appearing in a controlled environment without being accounted for? Seth didn't have an answer yet. His silence wasn't avoidance. It was calculation. Because responding too quickly could make the situation worse. And responding incorrectly could turn an awkward moment into a public incident. Meanwhile, Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Daniel kept his distance. Crew members pretended to focus on tasks that suddenly seemed meaningless. But Lindsay stayed exactly where she was. She didn't retreat. She didn't look away. She didn't fill the silence with forced politeness. She held eye contact. And that's when something subtle but powerful happened. Meghan's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal awareness. Because being ignored creates discomfort. But being confronted with honest curiosity creates accountability. She straightened slightly and responded again, this time more carefully. "Someone told me I could come." Someone. Not named. Not identified. Not confirmed. It was the kind of answer designed to stop questions without actually answering them. But Lindsay didn't back down. She didn't push aggressively either. She did something far more disarming. She smiled. Not warmly. Not mockingly. Just a small, knowing smile. The kind people give when they realize the situation is not what it appears to be. She spoke gently. "Well, I guess someone should have told the rest of us." It wasn't an attack. It wasn't disrespectful. It was truth wrapped in calm delivery. And truth can be the most uncomfortable sound in a room full of confusion. The hallway shifted again. Not tense, not frozen, just exposed. Because now the pretense was gone. Everyone knew the situation was real. Everyone knew it was unplanned. Everyone knew nothing about this moment made sense. Seth finally tried to defuse the escalation before it turned into something irreversible. He lifted his hand slightly, a small gesture meaning let's keep this controlled. Okay, let's just take a moment. We're about to start the show. We'll sort out logistics afterward. It was a temporary solution. But temporary solutions only work when everyone agrees to them. Lindsay didn't argue, but she also didn't pretend she was satisfied. She stepped back, not in retreat, but in decision. And that decision was simple. She wasn't going to participate in pretending everything was fine. Sometimes silence is resistance, but sometimes honesty is. From that moment on, the dynamic changed. Lindsay may not have said anything else aloud, but she didn't have to. Because her refusal to play along created a ripple effect that would follow into the studio. People can ignore tension backstage. They can't ignore it on camera. And the audience was about to witness something they weren't prepared for. Because the discomfort didn't stay in the hallway. It followed them onto the stage. And what happened next would turn an awkward moment into something publicly humiliating. Not because of what was said, but because of what was seen. Jonathan steps in. And it gets worse. Just when the tension backstage felt like it had reached its peak, Jonathan walked in. He hadn't been part of the hallway drama up to this point. He was unaware of the frozen stillness, the subtle judgments, the silent chess game unfolding between Meghan, Daniel, and Lindsay. But timing, as it often does, had chosen him. He entered with a casual stride, a slight smile, and the kind of energy that comes naturally to someone confident on stage. He had no idea the storm was waiting for him. And that, of course, made everything worse. The moment he saw Meghan standing there, calm, collected, slightly detached, his brain processed three things in a split second. 1. She wasn't supposed to be here. 2. Daniel and Lindsay were already engaged in a silent standoff with her presence. 3. He had walked straight into the epicenter of the tension. Jonathan, being Jonathan, reacted instinctively. Without pause, without hesitation, he blurted out the first words that crossed his mind. Who invited you here? Not whispered, not quiet, clear, firm, public. The effect was instantaneous. The silence that had been simmering now crackled like electricity. Daniel stiffened. Lindsay froze mid-breath. Seth Meyers, who had finally regained a fraction of composure, paused mid-step. Everyone in the hallway suddenly understood. This was no longer a subtle, awkward moment. This was now a confrontation. Jonathan didn't mean to escalate. He wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. But timing is cruel. And intention doesn't always match outcome. Meghan, still composed, didn't flinch. Her calmness was uncanny. She tilted her head slightly, meeting Jonathan's gaze directly. For a brief second, the hallway became a charged standoff, a silent negotiation of presence, authority, and expectations. And then came the part that really made the room shift. Instead of answering directly, Meghan smiled. Not warmly, not mockingly, just deliberately. A smile that said she knew exactly the effect her presence, and Jonathan's question, had created. That smile made the room conscious of every reaction, every subtle twitch, every micro-expression. The effect on Jonathan was subtle at first. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. A hesitation, a mental recalibration. But the hallway was tight, and hesitation was noticeable. Daniel leaned slightly forward, instinctively trying to assess if he should intervene, retreat, or just stay neutral. Lindsay's eyebrow rose, that small gesture of disbelief that amplified the tension even further. Then, the universe, or perhaps just bad luck, delivered the next moment. A camera crew, conducting last-minute rehearsal shots, turned the lens toward the hallway. It was meant to be a neutral shot, a standard check for lighting and angles. But instead, it captured the exact moment of confrontation. And the second Jonathan's question lingered in the air, Meghan's calm smile, and the room's silent shock, the magic, or chaos, of television happened. Time slowed. The hallway, the crew, the guests. Everyone became hyper-aware that something unscripted was unfolding. Because on camera, spontaneity is both a blessing and a curse. In this case, it was a curse. Jonathan realized his mistake. He tried to backtrack. He opened his mouth, attempting to soften the words, perhaps redirect, perhaps apologize. But Meghan, composed as ever, interrupted, not aggressively, not loudly, but enough to make a point. I'm just here to observe, she said. Simple, neutral, precise. It should have defused tension. It did not. Instead, it created a new problem: ambiguity. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't explaining. She wasn't apologizing. And now, the audience of staff, talent, and crew were all forced to confront the situation simultaneously. That is when the subtle games began. Daniel, instinctively socialized to de-escalate, tried to step between Jonathan and Meghan without looking like he was intervening. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but in the tight space, it was visible. The staff tried to subtly shift positions, hoping to create separation. Lindsay, steadfast, refused to move. Her decision was clear: honesty over avoidance. And that honesty forced Meghan into a position of control. The more Meghan remained composed, the more the hallway's energy shifted. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't overt aggression. It was control, command, the silent realization that she was no longer just an observer. Jonathan, realizing he had amplified the situation, tried to regain composure. His movements became cautious, deliberate, every gesture measured. But it was too late. Because in live television, perception matters more than reality. And the cameras, whether rehearsal or live feed, had already captured the tension. Now, here's the kicker. Backstage energy always translates to on-air energy. Even subtle reactions, a glance, a pause, a hesitant step, are picked up by the audience once cameras roll. And in this case, the energy was electric. Seth Meyers, finally reaching the hallway, had to navigate a minefield. Jonathan, unintentionally confrontational. Lindsay, principled but unwavering. Daniel, trying to remain neutral. Meghan, calm yet commanding. A single misstep could turn this backstage drama into a public spectacle. But Seth's job wasn't just management. It was navigation. It was control. It was survival. And at that exact moment, survival depended on three things: timing, tone, trust. He raised a hand slightly, attempting to signal calm without drawing attention. Then he spoke. "Okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's sort this out." It was professional, measured, and utterly ignored. Because Meghan's presence had changed the rules. The room wasn't just tense, it was conscious of her. Every reaction, every pause, every glance carried meaning. And then, before Seth could regain full control, Jonathan made another move. A comment. Not loud, not malicious, but loud enough to register in the minds of everyone present. Something he assumed would defuse the situation instead amplified it. Because what he said next set the stage for public embarrassment. And once those words left his mouth, there was no turning back. The night had officially tipped into chaos. And what came next would humiliate Meghan in a way no one backstage expected or could control. Audience reaction turns the tide. For all the chaos backstage, the most critical moment was yet to come. The audience didn't know. They hadn't sensed the tension, the whispered hesitations, the silent confrontations, or the subtle power plays happening just beyond the curtain. They were laughing, clapping, waiting, expecting the usual night of comedy. And that's why what happened next was so electric. Because the minute the first hint of backstage tension seeped onto the stage, the room changed. Let's rewind to exactly how it began. Seth Meyers, attempting to regain control after Jonathan's ill-timed comment, stepped into the hallway with all the composure of a seasoned host. He gave the polite, professional smile that says, "It's under control, everything's fine." But for someone like Meghan, that control wasn't going to dictate her presence. She had a subtle understanding of influence in public spaces. Not forceful, not loud, but undeniably present. So she leaned slightly forward. A gesture so small it could have been dismissed. But in the tight hallway, in the charged air, it was unmistakable. Daniel Radcliffe noticed immediately. Jonathan froze. Lindsay Mendez's skepticism sharpened further. And that small gesture, just a lean forward, was enough to begin a ripple effect. The ripple traveled fast. Backstage crew members, who had been trying to remain invisible, noticed the shift. Suddenly, every small movement mattered. A raised eyebrow, a step forward or back, a glance toward the cameras. It was subtle theater, without a script, and everyone was performing without knowing their lines. Meanwhile, Seth had to make a decision. Do you ignore the subtle cues and force the night to continue as planned? Do you acknowledge them and risk escalating the tension? He chose a middle ground, a neutral tone, a pause, But pauses, in live situations, often speak louder than words. And the audience began to notice. The first hint came during rehearsal. A slight awkwardness in the timing of applause cues. A subtle break in the usual rhythm of Seth's monologue. Then came the first visible reaction. Daniel, attempting to maintain composure, shifted in a way that drew the camera's eye. The audience, trained to react to subtle cues, registered it instantly. Laughter paused. Clapping hesitated. The room's energy flickered. Audience members sensed something was off. They didn't know exactly what, but they felt it, and the sensation was contagious. People in the front rows leaned forward. Eyebrows lifted. Eyes darted toward the stage. A murmur began, low and uncertain. The hush was different from backstage silence. This was curiosity. This was anticipation. This was the exact moment when human attention pivots from entertainment to suspense. And backstage, the tension was feeding on itself. Jonathan, who had caused the initial stir, noticed the audience reacting. He realized, just seconds too late, that his words weren't just awkward. They were amplified. Daniel, always aware of public perception, tried to subtly redirect attention back to the stage cues. But Meghan's presence, poised and unwavering, prevented any easy deflection. She wasn't trying to dominate. She wasn't trying to humiliate. She simply existed. And that existence was enough to change the atmosphere entirely. Now, here's the fascinating part about human psychology. Audiences mirror energy. If backstage tension is subtle, audiences often don't notice. But when that tension slips into small, visible cues, an odd glance, a sudden pause, an unexpected shift, the energy is contagious. The laughter on stage, which had been reliable, now faltered. A punchline landed differently. An applause cue came slightly late. The audience subconsciously registered a change in authority. And that's when Seth realized, this wasn't just a backstage problem anymore. This was about to become public. Because every small gesture Meghan made, every subtle pause, every glance, was now being interpreted not just by the staff, but by the audience. And the audience, as humans, will always read meaning where none is intended. The front rows exchanged glances. They sensed a story forming, something unscripted, something unplanned. And because humans are wired to detect hierarchy and social tension, the audience began to whisper, quietly, not to disrupt, not to comment, but to acknowledge the invisible power dynamics now in play. A subtle ripple of murmurs traveled across the room, reaching even the back rows. Suddenly, the energy of the show wasn't in the jokes or rehearsed lines. It was in the tension itself. Backstage, Daniel could feel it. Jonathan could feel it. Lindsay could feel it. And Seth, finally fully conscious of the situation, realized something critical. There was no turning back. Once the audience perceives tension, live television becomes a delicate balancing act. Anything can be amplified. Anything can be misinterpreted. Anything can explode. And Meghan, ever aware of perception, used that to her advantage. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't force attention. She simply allowed the room and its people to react. And that passive control was more powerful than any overt action could have been. The stage manager, watching quietly, realized the night had shifted. What should have been a routine show was now a subtle war of perception. Every movement, every gesture, every look had consequences. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Seth. Seth's eyes flicked toward the audience. Jonathan, realizing the stakes, swallowed hard. Lindsay remained calm. But even calm now carried weight. The first few audience members noticed subtle friction, the backstage tension bleeding onto the stage. They laughed slightly later than expected, clapped a beat too early, or leaned forward as if anticipating drama. And the cameras, always alert, captured every micro-expression. Every person in the audience was now participating, unknowingly, in the unfolding narrative. And the most critical moment was about to happen. Because when the audience is aware of tension, they demand resolution. And live television rarely provides controlled resolutions. It provides spectacle. And the spectacle was coming next. Because just as the first murmurs of curiosity spread through the crowd, Meghan did something subtle but undeniable. She smiled. Not at anyone in particular. Not directed. Just a small, knowing smile. And that smile was enough to ignite the audience's attention fully. Because humans instinctively detect power. And Meghan's calm, measured presence, combined with subtle cues, signaled exactly that. She was in control. The audience reacted immediately, almost subconsciously. Heads tilted, brows raised, eyes widened.